But on the other hand, you could say it's also a more forgiving audience because even if what you say is not resonating, you can continue nevertheless believing that everything that you say. Evidence shows us that these brands which have purpose and when they activate their purpose, these brands actually grow 69% faster than the rest of the business and accounted for three-fourths of the total growth that the company delivered. That's evidence. So that's internal evidence. You don't have to take internal evidence. There's evidence coming from Kantar when they issued their report on purpose in 2019, I think, or early this year, which actually states that decades really have done disservice to business in some form by propagating the notion that the sole purpose of business is shareholder wealth maximization. Nothing, in my view, could be farther from the truth. I believe ever since business first started, which might have been hundreds and thousands of years ago, when the first person somewhere found an issue, found some need in some society, some village, somewhere where they were living, and found a way to address it. That's how business started. Found a way to address a need in society. And when he addressed that need in society, he or she, society rewarded this person. And the reward was the profit which was made. That's how business first started. And that's relevant even today. The needs of society may have changed, but the purpose of business has not. The purpose of business even today is to address societal needs. The outcome of running a great business, the outcome of being honest to societal needs and serving those well is the profit which we make. And somewhere along the line, along the way, we got confused between purpose and outcome. Shareholder wealth maximization is the outcome of running a great business. Now, I also believe that a time will come when society simply will not allow any business to follow a strategy which is not overtly societally responsible and in the interest of society. It's not that business doesn't recognize that they have a role to play, that they have a role to play in and giving back to society. Of course they do. That's why many companies have been doing some great work in CSR. But if you look back at the history of corporate responsibility and social responsibility, frankly, the act of making money through the business and the act of giving back to society have almost been mutually independent activities. You make money and then you took some part of that money and gave it away and did something, whether it was schools, whether it was building hospitals or institutions. They're all good things to do, but it were independent of running the business. I think over the last few decades, these two independent activities have started coming closer. And today there is a small intersection. And that intersection means that in that little intersection, it means that when you operate there, those are strategies which are not good for business, but are also good for society. And it is our view as a company, and certainly my belief, that this movement of independent activities which have started coming together and there is a small intersection today will keep moving closer and closer till one day these two overlap. When they overlap, society simply will, what it means is that you simply cannot have a business strategy if it is not socially responsible and socially contributing positively to society. And equally, when you contribute positively to society, you will get rewarded as a business. That's what it really means. Now, it is also my feeling that events in 2020, especially over the last few months, might have accelerated the movement of these two circles and the coming together. Events which have triggered after COVID, which started off as a health crisis, but rapidly has become an economic crisis, a social crisis, and is beginning to surface issues that have been simmering, which have been under the surface for long, but are now becoming visible. What do I mean by that? Yeah, what I really mean is just look back at what's happened in after events which took place in the United States, after the police brutality that led to the killing of George Floyd. And that rapidly transformed into a movement that not just seized America, but a movement that started spreading across the world. It went to the UK, it went to Brazil, it went to South Africa, it went to Australia, different places, different manifestation, but it moved rapidly. And I think it would be unwise of people to start thinking of this as a movement that was restricted to the Black Lives Matter issue, which surfaced in the US, or that it might get restricted to a few geographies. I think there's a deeper issue here, an issue which comes from people who feel discriminated against, who don't see too much hope, who don't believe that the system is working for them. And such people today, with the ubiquitous social media, the universal access to all of this, they might have been silent in the past, but today they have a voice. And they've always had a choice in terms of what to do, what to buy, what not to buy. And it is this combination of the choice which they had with the voice which they now have is leading to these big movements. And I'm of the view that these will spread and will not remain restricted. And I think it is something that all of us need to reflect on, because these movements are asking all of us, and certainly asking business, tough questions. Tough questions which in the United States were about hashtag pull up or shut up. I don't know how many of you are aware of that. The Black Lives Matter movement, which led to this, started asking companies questions like, don't talk to me with brands, and don't have brands tell me and advise me and say the good, or talk the good talk, as they would say. Tell me what you're doing about it. Tell me about your company. Tell me what your representation of people of color, what is the representation of people of color in your organization? And disclose this. And if you're not, then frankly, the movement was looking to see how they would look to either support or boycott organizations based on real actions and real deeds. That's what's happening today. And it forced us as a company to respond in the United States in ways that we would have liked to do on our own terms, but it were external events that forced us to respond, and nobody likes that. And that caused a degree of reflection in our organization, a reflection where we came together to start asking ourselves, how do we go forward from here? We have been proud of our diversity journey that we've been on. We moved to a gender-balanced organization across the company after 8 or 10 years of effort. We are driving diversity in the form of sexual orientation and being more inclusive in that area. We are looking at the diffability or disability, as some would call it. But clearly there was a need for us. There was a need for us to start thinking more about race, about ethnicity, which is an incredibly complex subject because it's very different in different places. It's also an area which requires nuanced understanding. We started recognizing that there was a need for us to see how our workforce in different countries started better reflecting the society that we were serving. And not just for any other reason, not just for moral reasons, but simply that the business case associated with this, in our view, was quite compelling. Because increasingly we came to the conclusion that the issues that we are dealing with, the decisions that we need to make, are more complex and require a degree of cultural sensitivity, a degree of appreciation, where we are able to factor in not just the classic economic criteria behind the decision, but other considerations, often ethical considerations, moral considerations, clearly requiring a far more nuanced view and a degree of sensitivity that we may not have, and many of us might not be adequately trained in. But that's the world that we are living in at this moment. We also started realizing the incredible relevance and value of inclusion and diversity. How would we ever manage to get multiple perspectives on the table and dramatically diverse views if we as an organization don't have people who come in with such different perspectives? Uh, and the risks associated with being overly steeped and having a unidimensional and often a myopic view of what a business should do and what a business objective should be. So those have been some of our reflections, and I share this quite candidly. We take pride in the progress that we've made, but we are also hugely conscious of how much more we would need to do. Now, I could go on and on about a topic like this, but I would want to bring this to a close in some form. And before I bring it to a close, uh, I would simply want to say that it is that I recognize that as some of you have been listening to me, you might be wondering, gosh, uh, have you been listening to the chief operating officer of Unilever, or you've been listening to some tree hugger? Hmm. And if that's the notion that I've left some of you with, I want to quickly disabuse you of any unintended messaging that I might have had. Um, we are in business. I'm in business, and I'm absolutely unapologetic about driving business outcomes, driving growth, driving improvements in financial outcomes, uh, maximizing returns that we can get. But I'm also very clear that these returns have to be delivered in a certain manner, in a way that is socially responsible, environmentally positive. That's what is going to give us more joy. And we as a team would feel that we've made progress and we've contributed if through our actions we were able to demonstrate that it is possible to deliver exceptional financial outcomes while running a business which is environmentally and socially responsible. In fact, our goal, and one of the things that we would love to be proud of, if we can kill this debate, we can kill this debate once and for all whether a responsible and sustainable company can at all deliver exceptional financial outcomes. We aspire to deliver returns in the top one third of our peer group consistently over time. And if we can do this following the paths that I've talked about, I believe we would make a big difference and start addressing some of the issues that business faces today. Business has, if you were to go back and look at the Edelman's Trust Barometer, uh, business and business leaders are fairly low down in the trust that society has in them. Society often thinks of business as self-serving people and and acting in a way which is not in the larger interest of society, and that is such a terrible outcome, because in these times more than ever, business has a bigger role to play, and business can be a force of good. So I'd bring all of this to an end in simply hoping that through the pursuit of business, we can start making a positive difference to society. And I think purpose at the heart of what we do can make a big difference. Like I said before, we genuinely believe that brands with purpose can grow, people with purpose can thrive, and companies with purpose last. That's it from me, and open it up to any questions and comments that you might have. If I have the answers, I will give them to you. If I don't, I will tell you honestly that I don't have them. So with that, let me hand you back to the host, or to Tushar, who's going to moderate this.
Thanks, Nitin. It was great listening to a business leader who is a truly believer, practitioner, and actually guru in a sort of purpose, right? And it was absolutely wonderful. I'm requesting all the participants to sort of start sending their questions. We already have few. But let me start with a question and to continue your sort of end thought. What would be how do we go about measuring business impact or purpose? What will be your tips for a business which is looking into those areas? So, how often the ROI around the purpose seems to be a bit fuzzy for many entities, and how do we sort of go about establishing linkage?
It's a great question and something that we have spent a lot of time thinking about. And as we started becoming clearer on what is the right purpose, what is the meaningful purpose, and what is the best expression of it, we became convinced that purpose actually drives better ROI and not worse ROI. I'll explain why. Um, First thing I want to establish clearly to everyone is having a purpose. For a brand to have a purpose, it does not take away the responsibility of the brand to deliver exceptional and strong functional benefits, making sure that it is addressing real needs, which are real category related needs, and is delivered at the right price. Those are a given, but increasingly, those are not enough to differentiate you in this market because feature led differences, product led differences have a life cycle which is very small. The half life of retaining that advantage is becoming smaller and smaller. Therefore, in the times that we find ourselves in, it is difficult for brands to stand apart. We all hear about how difficult it is to get noticed, and that's why we have to keep spending more and more and more in order to even get noticed by this consumer. Now I want you to think about purpose. I'd like each one of you for a moment to shut your eyes and think of an issue which is dear to you, an issue that you care about deeply. It could be different issues for each one of you, but an issue which you genuinely care about. Now, having thought of that issue, I'd like you to now think of and imagine for a moment that there was a brand. There was a brand that genuinely, truly, authentically cared for that same issue. If such a brand existed, do you think you could ever resist this brand? There is no chance. You will be inextricably drawn towards this brand because this brand touches, cares for, propagates the thing that you care about. And when you find something that you care about, how often would you need to hear that message? Once? Twice? Because you won't need to hear it 10 times for it to cut through the clutter because the message cuts through. Today, what's happening with most brands, the reason we talk about clutter and we have to cut through is because our message is not relevant. The message is not connecting with individuals. And instead of sharpening the message, marketeers are lazy and are putting in more money to try and take a blunt, undifferentiated message and try and make sure that it cuts through the clutter. So when you have a sharp message, it cuts through. And in the world of social, it drives talkability. And we all understand the relevance, talkability, and cut through, and therefore better ROI. When you don't get all of this, then you know that it's not the right purpose. Yeah. And you have to work hard. And the other thing I would say, purpose needs to get integrated so that this whole thing about different product story communication, different purpose communication, ideally you have to find a way to integrate the two. That's when you know you have cracked the idea.
Right. And there's in fact a related question. Can brands sustain the same purpose for a long time? So during the brand life cycle, change over a period of time?
I think brands could sustain that purpose for, I don't know whether it's forever, but certainly for long periods of time. That's for sure. The manifestation of that purpose might change. It might alter, it might modify to make sure it remains relevant and resonates with the changes taking place in society. But at its core, that purpose could have and will have a longevity, which is several years, possibly decades. Take Dove as an example of a brand which has been on this journey at least for a decade or more. It's been talking about um, changing perceptions of beauty and in helping women have, starting off with women, a better self appreciation and confidence in beauty and redefine beauty and the stereotypes around beauty. It's been decades that, it's been years for sure, and it might continue for a much longer period of time. How it gets expressed, the focal points may keep changing, not just over time, but also across how that same purpose is translated across different countries.
Within couple of questions coming around the resourcing, right? So how do we sort of resource sort of this kind of activity? One question is coming from a SMB versus large organization, and for SME it might be difficult to organize all the resources for a purpose or a sustainable practice. And what's your advice on that?
Actually, that's a great question, and it's actually the exact opposite is true, is what I would say. I'll address the SME question first. If you look around to all the new brands which have come up, young startups, the ones who are ankle biters, who are coming and nibbling away at these big brands, yeah, several of them have purpose at their heart. Yeah, they start off with a very distinct point of view. They start appealing to a relatively focused group of people who care about this issue. And by doing that, they actually find that they are able to target sharply, spend a lot less, and are able to compete more effectively because they stand out. And there is a real reason why somebody chooses them. So actually, purpose and a sharply distinctive point of view focused around a real issue requires less resource and not more resource, linked to my earlier point, because linked to relevance and talkability and cut through, etc., which is there. So that's, I think, the first point. And in some ways, it also addresses the larger issue of resource that you talk about. But there is sometimes a tension in terms of resource. If I take aspects to do with other dimensions of sustainability, for example, we'd like to create a circular economy. We would like to address our plastics agenda. We would want to have more sustainable sourcing. And at times it costs us money. And then the question often comes up between managing the short term and the long term, etc. But if you have conviction, you provide for it. So there are some parts of sustainability which require investment and resource, but there are other aspects of sustainability which actually release resource. So if you want to reduce waste, and you want to reduce water, and you want to reduce energy, these are all good things to do. If that doesn't cost you more money, it costs you less money in a factory when you use less energy, less water, less waste. It actually saves money. So there are plenty of pursuits of sustainability and which in the short term save you money. Some of them require investment, and businesses should be open to making those investments. Otherwise, you won't survive in the years to come.
The second related question was in terms of prioritizing, and how are you sort of continuing to ensure that your people are equipped to achieve the purpose in a current context, especially the COVID situations?
Sorry, could you repeat this question?
So how are you continue to ensure that your people are equipped to achieve the purpose? How are you enabling people in the current situation, especially COVID kind of situation?
So, one of the things that a couple of years which we started is to help individuals identify what makes them tick, what gives them energy. So we run workshops within the organization for all our people to help them understand the power of purpose, to help them understand what they are excited about, what they're not excited about, and the going through a very systematic purpose workshop helps people crystallize and even understand what gives them energy and what saps energy. And therefore, how do they start spending a little more time in the areas which gives them energy? And we encourage people to actually move in those areas. As a consequence of some of these people have even said, I'd like to work in this part of the business. I'd like my career to be in this manner. I'd like to do. And I think it has been incredibly powerful to be able to help people identify purpose and see whether it can be linked with organizational purpose and organizational value. If not, you're better off leaving the company. If your purpose is not in sync with the organizational purpose initiatives, you're better to leave this company. We spend so much time in the organization, so many of our waking hours are there. We cannot have a situation where we are doing things which are at cross purposes with what the organization is trying to do, because then that saps you. But if you are aligned to it, it gives you energy. You can work long hours, and yet you can be have a spring in your step. That's one. Number two, that said, COVID does put in a lot of pressure. People are working from home. It is not so easy. Conditions are difficult. It tests resilience, mental health. So we provide forums for all of this for people to engage and people to have dialogues. We provide support groups to address some of these issues. But and we keep monitoring how people are feeling, how engaged they are, and how purposeful, how they feel, whether their purpose connects with the company.
That's really powerful. The next question, let me ask in two parts. So have you been to a situation where sort of business priority or business decision is in a conflict of a brand purpose? And is there any sort of narrative or is there any sort of story which you would like to share? And there is a second part which I'll come to.
I haven't come to it in the form of a dilemma that you raised, which is business objective and brand purpose. Because for us, brand purpose is in service of these outcomes. When you pursue a brand purpose well, you will not only make a difference to the society, but when you make a difference to society, you will get better business outcomes. So there is no conflict there. The conflicts and the tension often arises between short-term versus long-term. Taking decisions which are trying to be expedient and solve for now versus doing what is right for the long term. And have I come across those decisions? The answer is yes. Situations. And have I made mistakes? The answer is yes. There have been times when I have been guilty of being more short term and thinking I will get away with it and I will solve the problem through quick fixes, etc. But in hindsight, every time I've done that, I've realized there is no shortcut to long-term success. Every time you try and take these shortcuts, they don't work and they don't give you sustainable outcomes. And it has led me to strengthen a belief in my mind that always do the right thing. In the end, when you do the right thing, the right outcomes follow. And for me, it has almost become like a law. I keep saying, it's a law like gravity. When you drop something, it falls down every time. So also, when you do the right thing, the right outcomes follow sooner or later. And the temptation to take shortcuts has proved bad for me. That's message number one. Number two, this is not a black and white situation. I think people need to exercise judgment. Judgment between balancing the short and the long and things of that sort. And with experience, more often than not, we'll get it right and we will continue to make some mistakes.
The second part of question is basically similar tension between sort of society, consumer, and the brand purpose, right? Suppose a brand takes a stand or brand goes on a journey of purpose. And consumers basically are skeptical about the brand's commitment on that, and it creates a societal tension with that purpose. Can it be a counterproductive? Can it go negative to the brand? So is there any danger on?
So listen, I think what is brand standing for? When a brand stands for an issue, when it fights for a cause, or fights against a certain situation, inevitably you run the risk of alienating a few people. Yeah, inevitably. So brands have a choice to make. If you want to be in a situation where you will simply not alienate anyone, frankly, you're unlikely to be dear to anyone else. So if you play too safe in today's world, it is unlikely that you will stand apart. So brands have to make a choice, have to stand for something, and they have to be smart in terms of the issues which they stand for, so that they're convinced that the people whom we attract, the people whom we address, uh, are the people whom you wish to address, and that it is okay to alienate a few people who don't buy into that cause, if that be the case. Also, ask yourself: uh, a brand to be successful doesn't need 100% of the people to buy into it. Brands can be super successful with a super loyal base of 10, 15, 20%, 25%. Now, surely you have to be able to find issues. If you're looking for issues which are even smaller than that, and very few people buy into it and most people don't, then maybe you could still have a brand, but it's likely to be a niche brand. That's a choice that you have to make.
The next question, which is coming from for your advice, what's your advice for especially a commodity category kind of brand, right? So payment brand or a no-frill banking kind of brand.
Sorry, what type of brands?
Payment related products or a no-frill banking kind of brands. How does one sort of go on the journey of brand purpose in those situations?
You have to ask yourself, what is the value that you're offering society? Some of them, it is not, and sometimes it is intangible, sometimes it is trust, sometimes it is, so it could be anything. So I can't give a specific example of what would be the purpose that a brand like this, because it takes time and you have to work it through. But my experience tells me that all brands can find a purpose which appeals to them, makes the people working on it feel good, is relevant to society, and can be integrated in some form with what they do. It's easier in some cases if you're a brand which is delivering hygiene at this moment to say that I'm going to be addressing health, hygiene, and address disease. It's easier. For some other brands, it is a little more difficult. But if you can find that, it just makes for deeper connections with people and will help you in your journey.
There is an interesting question in terms of how you sort of link or rather dealing corporate social responsibility and brand purpose. Is it something similar, and how has it changed in again COVID kind of situations?
For us, the old notion of corporate social responsibility is almost dead, where company made some money, and if you made some profit, let's say you made a profit of X, or let's say the company makes a net profit of 10%, and then you said, I'll take 10% of that and give it back as CSR, or 20% of that and give it as CSR. That would mean 2% of your business was doing social good. Yeah. I think the new notion of responsibility is when the totality of your business is socially responsible. Through 100% of your value chain, through your supply chain, through your sourcing, through your engagement with your suppliers, through your partners, through your the fair trade practices that you have, the employment terms that you have, and through our brands in the way they're engaging. So we've talked today a lot about just the aspect of brands and the causes that they stand for in connecting with consumers, but a company needs to be wholly responsible through the extended value chain by putting in place practices which drive responsibility and raise the standards of behavior in the totality of what we do, and helps the environment and helps society. So for me, that's the future of corporate responsibility, and not the erstwhile notion that make some profit and give 10, 20% or some share of that and put it back for social good.
Let me ask the last question. I guess we have quite a few questions, but in the interest of time. So you know, HUL also like believes in many India within the India kind of scenario, and you also look at multiple geography. So how does a brand purpose or a single brand translate across multiple geography? How do you sort of address like a developed market versus developing market, one market within India versus another market in India? So how does one treat that?
My experience has been that often purpose is rooted into a higher level human insight or a societal issue. So if it is around climate change, that's a big issue, or it is around empowerment, it could be around now issues to do at this level are basic human issues, human needs, human insecurities, which are relevant everywhere in the world. The expression of that will vary market by market. In some places, if you are driving tolerance and driving people together because we feel that the world is becoming full of hate and we want to reduce hate, in some countries, it might be around race. In some countries, it might be around religion. In some countries, it might simply be around inclusion of different forms. So the issue that you pick up under the overall umbrella will vary, and it must vary for it to resonate with society. We must never forget that purpose, what you're trying to do is to address societal tensions and societal issues, and societal issues in different markets will have different expressions. Often they are under a handful of global umbrella themes, which brands must then start occupying and manifest themselves differently in different places.
Thanks, Nitin. It was wonderful listening to you. And there are sort of all of them in every statement which you are saying. I'm sure the audience will agree with me and would take away definitely a very clear message. With this, I'm just going to hand over Shivani to do a closure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Paranjpe and Mr. Vyas, for such an insightful session. Thank you to all our delegates and audience as well. Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.